Well, good afternoon, and thanks for taking time out of your day to join me. One of the things I've been thinking about today is, as I've talked with some people, is that this pandemic has not had the same impact on everyone. And one of the way I've seen that is how it relates to the experience of aloneness that a lot of people are dealing with. Now, some of you I know would say that you're probably less alone now than you were before all of this started, because husbands and wives are home from work, kids are all home all the time. There aren't as many activities, even as a family, that you can get out and do. So aloneness has probably gone way down. For most of us, we'd say there's less social interaction, less public activities, things to get out and do, at least around other people. And I've talked with some people that, boy, this has just been an experience of just incredible aloneness for them, where they are just really feeling isolated because they're home by themselves, not able to get out and be with others. And it's just really been a tough experience. So I know this is a little different for everybody. And I think all of us at some time in life would probably have has said, that we enjoy some more alone time. We like some time alone. But the thing I found is that we usually don't like time alone unless we're in control of it. Most of us prefer alone time if we get to decide when it ends. As a pastor and a counselor, one of the things that I found as I talk with people over the years is that sometimes there's such a fear of aloneness that we will do almost anything to avoid it. Sometimes that grows out of some really horrible experiences of abandonment or experiences where we've been rejected by someone that we wanted to accept us. But again, it can create in us this fear that drives sometimes some really unhealthy behavior. I've known people at times that we even end good relationships uh, before there's any sign of problems, simply because they want to be the ones that are in control of whether that relationship goes on or not. So again, I know aloneness can be a pretty tough thing, a pretty terrifying thing, even at times for people. Uh, but I do think there are times when choosing to be alone is actually a very healthy thing to do. Now, as you know, the Bible is pretty clear that we were not designed by our Creator to be alone. We were created uh, to live in relationship with others and relationship with God. But that's not to say that there is no need for times of solitude. And by solitude, I mean time away from people, but I also mean time away from some of our usual activities and distractions. Most recognize there's value in solitude. Most people I talk with would say, yes, we know that that can be a good and healthy thing. They understand the value of the discipline of solitude as a believer. Yet I still think for a lot of us, it's just uncomfortable. We avoid it because there's something about that aloneness that's just hard. Sometimes the hard is just simply we get bored. We live in a world of constant stimulation, and sometimes we just don't know how to deal with quiet. I would say I'm guilty of that a lot of times. Sometimes it's really more than that. I love some writing of Henry Nouwen where he's talked about this. He wrote, "As soon as we are alone, without people to talk with, books to read, TV to watch, or phone calls to make, an inner chaos opens up in us. This chaos can be so disturbing and so confusing that we can hardly wait to get busy again. Entering a private room and shutting the door, therefore, does not mean that we immediately shut out all inner doubts, anxieties, fears, bad memories, unresolved conflicts, angry feelings, or impulsive desires. On the contrary, when we have removed our outer distractions, we often find that our inner distractions manifest themselves in full force." He goes on a little later and writes, "It is thus not surprising that we have a difficult time being alone. But this makes the discipline of solitude all the more important." He says that solitude in some ways is actually a cure to loneliness, the difficulty being alone, which is a strange thing to say. If you look at the example of Jesus, he definitely found solitude to be something that was worthy of his time, an important discipline in his life. When you look at scripture, you'll find that he began his public ministry with 40 days alone in the desert. Before choosing the 12, he spent the night alone in the desert hills. When he received the news of John the Baptist's death, scripture tells us that he withdrew from there in a boat to a lonely place apart. After feeding the 5,000, he went up into the hills by himself. Following a long night of work, Mark tells us that in the morning, a great while before day, he rose and went out to a lonely place. And after the 12 returned from a preaching and healing mission, Jesus instructed them to come away by yourselves to a lonely place. In one of the stories where right after he had healed a leper, scripture tells us he withdrew to the wilderness and prayed. And even that time when he prepared for his highest and most holy work, Jesus sought the solitude of the Garden of Gethsemane. So, if for no other reason, we ought to consider the discipline of solitude simply because of the example of Jesus and the importance he placed on periodically getting away from people, from the normal routine, from all the distractions, to be quiet, to be by himself with his Father. Now, the discipline of solitude is really not just about being alone. It's not just finding time alone. It's also about quieting the distractions so that we can hear and see some things that are often missed because of all the noise and activity and interactions in our life. Some of you remember a man named Al Parker. He attended our church quite a while ago now. Al and Amy Parker here were several years, and Al's job was working for the state of Indiana, monitoring and caring for hawks and eagles. But at ECC, I would say one of the things that Al was best known for was he would come out to Camp Olivet every year, and he would lead what we called a night hike. And the goal of the night hike was to go out in the woods with all of the campers late at night, be incredibly quiet. And the hope was that at some point, Al Parker would find an owl, a barn owl, or some type of owl up in a tree, and then he would do his owl calls to it, and hopefully it would respond back, and they'd have a little Al Parker, and the bird owl would have a little conversation out there in the woods. But to do this, he had to get all these kids completely quiet and go on this hike. That's a pretty tough job when you've got 60 plus kids and counselors, and then you have adults thrown in with the group. This huge group going through the woods, and Al's job was to try and get them to be quiet. But the way he would approach it every year was he would ask the kids to be quiet. He'd have them practice it once in a while. But he would also really highlight the fact that they were being quiet for a purpose. Their purpose was that if they could be really quiet, that there were things moving in the woods that they would get to see and they would get to hear that they would never get to do otherwise unless they were quiet. He asked them to be quiet and to really pay attention so that they would get the chance to experience something remarkable. I think that's in a lot of ways what the discipline of solitude is about. It's not about just getting away and having some quiet time, and that's good. All of us need some time just to relax, to be away from other people, to experience some quiet. But it's really more about being quiet for a purpose, that we might be really present, that we might be available and create some space in the busyness and the noise of our life, that we might experience something of God's presence that we just won't normally experience because of all the distractions. I love a quote from Dallas Willard. He says, "The cure of loneliness is solitude and silence, for there you discover in how many ways you are never alone." Again, the goal is solitude is not to be alone. The goal of the discipline of solitude is to be with God in a way that we just don't get to experience in our normal lives. And we live in a world where there are just constant distractions, where there is constant noise. Think of all the ways people can get access to us and gain our attention. It is just rare we get away from all of that. And I'm not saying we need to always be away from that, but it's rare that we get any time away from that we can simply sit and allow ourselves to be available to God and present towards Him. So I know it probably sounds a little strange to be encouraging to choose some intentional times alone in a time when we're probably all feeling a little too alone from time to time. But again, I'm just saying take some moments away from your normal routine and from the distractions of your normal day. Make some space to be alone with God. A few suggestions for that. One, solitude and silence takes some practice. It's not something that we just naturally do. I've mentioned before that I read by one psychiatrist whose books I've really enjoyed. He has mentioned that research says that the most bored people in the world, the most bored group of people in the world, some research has said, are adolescent boys in the United States. And when they've looked at that research, they've said the reason they think that they are the group that most struggles with boredom is because they are the group of people in the world whose lives are most constantly um, stimulated, that all their senses are most constantly being stimulated. Well, I don't think that's just adolescent boys in the United States. I think that's all of us. We just live in a world where there's constantly something going on before us, constant sound, constant interaction, constant availability to others. So, so it's going to be a little difficult at first. Start with some short moments of silence and solitude. Build up from there, but practice it. You may want to start by reading a psalm or saying the Lord's Prayer or some other way to kind of just settle your thoughts, to calm yourself down and to prepare yourself to be present with God. But remember again that solitude, even though it can be very uncomfortable at first, it takes walking through some of discomfort to get to the point that it's meaningful. So don't give up on it too quickly. I want to end by reading a psalm, and maybe this would be a good psalm to read in those moments of solitude to sort of prepare yourself for that time. It's Psalm 46. Here it is. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Hey, thanks for taking some time from your day to listen. Hope you guys will all join us again on Sunday as we live stream our Sunday service. We miss seeing y'all face to face. Hope that'll change soon. Have a good afternoon.